Let's join Mouin Rabbani, a resident fellow at the Centre for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, and joins us now from Montreal in Canada. Mr. Rabbani, good to have you with us on the programme. As I'm sure you've heard from our correspondents, a very fluid situation and a very difficult one and a fragile ceasefire. There are so many moving parts right now. Anything can happen to dislodge this, which is a real worry for all sides.
Yes, I think this is a huge development. These very moving scenes of thousands and thousands of Palestinians returning to the northern Gaza Strip, which was supposed to be thoroughly and permanently emptied of its Palestinian inhabitants. I think what we need to understand is that decisions now are being taken first and foremost in Washington. And Israel's role is either to do as it's told by the Americans or to use the freedom of action it's given by the Americans to do as it pleases. And we know that these developments that we're seeing on our screens now of these Palestinians returning to the northern Gaza Strip is for Israel the nightmare scenario. This wasn't supposed to happen. The northern Gaza Strip was supposed to be completely emptied and eventually replaced with Jewish settlers. So the fact that this is happening shows that Washington, at least until now, is maintaining an interest in seeing the implementation of the agreement that the former Biden administration systematically refused to support, but which the Trump administration is apparently taking seriously. The next key test is going to come in the transition from the first stage of the ceasefire to the second stage, because that is still being negotiated. And we will have to see if the Americans will once again compel the Israelis to implement the agreement that they forced them to sign, essentially, last week.
So what do you make then, Mr. Rabbani, of the mixed messages that we're hearing, certainly on the ground and also politically? The mixed messages, for example, is a Netzerim corridor is something that was created during this conflict. It is a barrier that is created by the Israelis and to a certain extent is still controlled by the Israelis. And yet we're also hearing now from Trump saying that Gaza should be cleared out. It's very uncertain as to how the diplomats and the negotiators move forward, not knowing really how movable the actual thought process is, either in Tel Aviv or in Washington.
Well, that's a very pertinent point. Just regarding Trump, he says lots of things, many of them in direct contradiction with each other. What's alarming here is that he's actually spoken with the Jordanian and Egyptian rulers about this idea of the ethnic cleansing, essentially, of the Gaza Strip. But he's been told in no uncertain terms that this is not something that's going to happen. And I think even if he applies pressure on Jordan and Egypt, I think their leaderships will recognize that the price of going along with Trump is going to be much greater than the price of resisting him in terms of, the survival of their leaderships for participating in something like this. And essentially, this isn't going to happen because Israel is not going to succeed in ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip after a war, after having failed to do so during a war. And if you may remember that in October and November of 2023, Biden actually sent his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on a tour of Arab states to promote this idea, and was met with a blanket refusal. So I think the alarm is quite justified, but I really don't see conditions developing for this to be implemented.
If ethnic cleansing is off the table as far as the Arab nations are concerned, and they're making that very clear to the Trump administration, it does prove a problem, though, doesn't it, for Netanyahu? Because at the end of the day, people like Ben Gvir, the right-wing politician, and Smotrich, his finance minister, who's still within the government, believe that we're hearing from various analysts over this past several weeks, that they've been made promises that things are going to change in Gaza on the ground. And as you say, there has been this talk of clearing the northern sector of Gaza, and there was talk of settlers moving in. I mean, this is going to create problems within his cabinet, and there is talk about a collapse of the government and a potential Israeli general election. Where do you see this? Is there any reality in this actually happening?
Well, that's entirely possible. I mean, the kind of political crisis that existed in Israel with respect to the government's legislative program for the Israeli judiciary is now coming back into view with recent developments in the Israeli Supreme Court. And I think it's virtually certain that Netanyahu has made all kinds of promises to all kinds of people after he was forced to accept this agreement, and he will now have to explain to his coalition partners, who basically think that Israel is the superpower in the relationship with the United States. He will have to explain to them that Israel is not in a position to give orders to Washington, and that it's the other way around. And in response to that, they may well not only leave the coalition, but also support a no-confidence motion against him. And that would lead to new elections. I think there's a kind of a mix of personal, political, and ideological factors at play. But ultimately, I think the key relationship to look at here is not that between Netanyahu and his coalition partners, or between Israelis and Palestinians, but between Washington and Israel, because Washington is the one calling the shots, and Israel has no choice but to comply. And if it doesn't comply, that is a very clear indication that Washington is giving Israel freedom of action to derail this agreement and to resume its genocidal campaign.
It's always good to get your insight, and we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Mouin Rabbani there, joining us from Montreal. Thank you, sir.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.